What's up everybody, Rob here. So I'm going to be doing something I've never actually done before, and that is a book review. I've never done a book review before. I have no idea how to do a book review, but I'm going to take a shot at it anyway. In any case, I'm going to be reviewing Shadow of the Conqueror, the first book of the Chronicles of Everfall, and the first published novel by Shad M. Brooks. If you're interested in the review and the review only, just go to the time on the screen right there. I'm just going to be doing a little bit of disclaimers and that sort of thing, some intros, that kind of stuff. If you're not interested in that, you can skip to the time on the screen. That being said, though, I recommend you watch anyway, just to get a full idea of what's going on here, and also I would really appreciate the extra views and the extra watch time. I care not from whence the views come, only that they do. So like I said, this is the first published novel by Shad M. Brooks, and if that name sounds familiar to you, that is Shad from Shadiversity. It's a YouTube channel that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's a YouTube channel that I've been a fan of for many years now, way back when the channel was actually I Am Shad, which was a couple of years ago. And actually the first video on my channel was a response to Shadiversity, so the reason why my channel exists at all, at least in some very small way, is due to, well, Shadiversity. So the reason why I'm even doing this is because of Shad. Shad, if you are watching this, thank you for that, for giving me the motivation to do that, like that final push to actually, do a video. But also, congratulations on all of your success. Your YouTube channel is doing spectacularly well, and you deserve it. The channel is one of my favorites. And I also want to congratulate you on your success with this book. It's a major pain in the neck to write a novel. I've never done it. I gave some attempts, and they're pretty abysmal. So I understand the amount of at least a small degree of the amount of work and effort you have to put into this, and congratulations on all of your success. That being said, I'm going to go into this in a completely objective way, or at least as objective as I can. I mean, I don't know if you can ever fully get rid of biases, but I'm going to try to as much as possible, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm going to be as truthful as I can with this. Yeah, there you go. So I went into it, even though knowing it was written by Shad, somebody who I'm particularly a fan, I'm a fan. I went into it with no expectations whatsoever, just neutral. I'm just gonna read it, and whatever happens, happens. And well, here's my review of it. I got the Kindle edition. The reason why I got the Kindle edition, because it's more convenient for me. People say they need to have the hard physical copy with you. I used to be like that. Then I started reading the Wheel of Time series, and looked at the Wheel of Time series. Then looked at my bookshelf. Then I look back to the Wheel of Time series, then I look back to the bookshelf, and I'm like, I'm going ebook. Yeah, and I never look back. It's just way more convenient, but that's just me. I don't think buying the Kindle edition is any different from the other editions, but I'm just putting it out there for the sake of full disclosure. It's available also with paper, in paperback or hardcover, and also audiobook, which I think there were issues, but I'm pretty sure those have been cleared up right now. So just go to Amazon, type in Shadow of the Conqueror and Shad M. Brooks, and it'll pop up, and you can get whatever format's best for you. And before I begin with the review itself, one final thing I just want to point out is a lot of you are asking probably why I'm walking around with a bardiche. And the answer is because I want to, and I can. It's my channel, and have you ever seen a book review with a bardiche? No, you haven't. It's never been done before. I'm the first. I'm a trendsetter. I'm a pioneer. Subscribe to my channel because I'm awesome like that. Yeah, I'm not desperate for subscribers or anything. Yeah, just pander. Just keep pandering. So to get down to the actual review itself, Shadow of the Conqueror, part of the Chronicles of Everfall, is a high fantasy, or specifically it is a high concept fantasy, as opposed to a low fantasy. The line between the two is kind of blurry, and it's kind of a subjective thing, but basically the fantastical elements are cranked up higher. Basically, the more, or the sooner you realize you're not in Kansas anymore, the more likely it is to be a high fantasy. This is most certainly high fantasy. For example, in this universe, the world is flat that everything takes place on, and no, we're not doing that argument. We are not going down that road. Don't even start. Don't. Just so the world is flat, and the sun is perpetually in the sky. It is light out all the time. It is never not dark, except during specific events in history called nights, because obviously nights. But these lead to a whole host of issues, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But also, because the world is flat, you can go to the end of the continent you're on, And if you were to go there and you were to look up, you would see because time and space is kind of warped there, you can go to the end of the continent, look up, and you can see the end of the continent that you're sitting on, that you're standing on. And if you have a powerful enough telescope, if you were to look up, you can actually see yourself looking at yourself. So yeah, you most certainly ain't in Kansas anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the plot of the novel, and just so you guys are aware, there might be some minor spoilers ahead. Not because I'm giving you any particular spoilers here, but because people tend to be overly sensitive about spoilers. You give a minor plot point, someone online, oh my god, you spoiled that! I'm not spoiling things, you're just sensitive. Just a warning, spoilers ahead. Maybe, whatever. Any case, so the plot revolves around a character named Dueling, who is a horrifyingly evil dictator. He has committed all sorts of atrocities during the course of his life. He has committed rapes, robberies, murders, genocides, like, pretty much a real evil dude. And at the end of his life, he's given a chance to possibly redeem himself. Here's possibly a minor spoiler, but it's like at the first maybe 5% of the book, so I don't know how much of a spoiler it would be, but whatever. He becomes young again, and the book is him basically trying to redeem his past actions, and that brings up a load of philosophical and moral issues. It's basically as if, say for example, Hitler was 1945 and he's in the bunker and he somehow manages to escape and becomes a 20-year-old again. Should he have a chance at redemption? How would we respond as a society? If Hitler were to be walking around right after World War II, would he be allowed redemption? Would he be given an opportunity to make right the wrongs he has committed? That being said, though, the ideology of Dueling during his time as a dictator is actually very Marxist, Leninist. Basically, he's much more Stalin or Pol Pot than he was Hitler, at least as far as the policies go. A lot of collectivization going on, stuff like that, and I'm not really going to get into too much detail there. But basically, just pick a 20th century dictator. Dictator of choice, whatever you feel like, and should that guy have a chance at redemption? And what I want to say though is that brings up a very big philosophical point. Is there a point where somebody's evil actions are so great that they cannot be redeemed any further, where they're just beyond any hope? Is it possible to be beyond hope? And that's a very deep philosophical question. And to be honest, I don't really know the answer. I mean, I can tell you what the book said, but that would be a spoiler, and you should just have to read that yourself. But that is a really good question. I mean, now there are points in the story where I felt absolute sympathy, where Dueling was trying to do good. He was trying to redeem himself, and I was feeling legitimately sorry for him because he was being prevented from doing so. His reputation preceded. Well, it's more complicated than his reputation, but the reputation of Dueling had preceded him, and he was being prevented from, basically his past was coming back and basically trying to haul him back to the way he was before, and I felt legitimately bad for him. But I'm thinking also, this guy's like the Hitler of the universe, of this world. Guy's kind of a tool. Maybe he does it. So I was very conflicted about my opinions of him, and that's a good thing. That showed the complexity of the problem. It's not it shows. It's not portrayed as black and white. Yes, he 100% deserves a chance at redemption, and anybody who gets in the way is wrong. Or saying no, he doesn't, and his attempts are completely pointless, and he's wasting his time. It really straddles that line very, very, very well, where you can see both sides of the story very, very easily. So kudos to Shad for writing that. It's a very difficult thing to do, and I think you managed it. So that's a very basic plot outline, and that's a very basic overview of the plot. And if you're interested, that should hopefully have piqued your interest. Now, the ultimate question to review is, did I like it? People oftentimes get bogged down in the minutia of what they liked about the characterization, the plot, the world building, whatever, and I'll get into that. But the ultimate question is, did I enjoy the story? Was I entertained by this? Or more importantly, because I'm a cheap bastard, Was this worth my money? And the answer is a resounding yes. I loved it. It was a fantastic novel. It is very well written. The prose is very well put together. The basic, the writing itself. Like I said, it has a very nuanced plot. Is it possible to be redeemed? And again, it shows both sides of the story, and both sides have very legitimate points. And I loved it. The plot was very well paced. It didn't get bogged down at any point. At the same time, it wasn't rushed either. It wasn't, bang, bang, okay, we need to be here. Okay, now we need to be here. Okay, now we need to be here. You can see the very logical progression of the plot and how the characters got from, where they were to where they were after that. And, they eventually, you can see, when they got to the ending, you can follow the chain of events very logically to get there, and it happened at a decent pace. So there you go. So while the plot was very good and the pacing is very good, also the characters are very well developed and very well written. Each of the characters, at least the major characters, not the main characters, but the major characters have their own reasons for doing what they do. There's a bit of a problem in lots of literature, especially fantasy literature, where characters service the plot. And plot does come, I believe plot is more important than characters, but not by much. That's a subjective opinion. But what I mean by this is sometimes a character exists because the plot needs them to exist. For example, we need a love interest. So what's this character do? They're the love interest. Why are they there? The protagonist doesn't need a love interest. Just say hypothetically, well, what's the point of this character being there? Well, that character has no personality beyond that. Same thing, we need a mentor character, so this person's just now the mentor. Well, what is their life outside of their relationship to the person they're mentoring? Well, it doesn't exist. Well, okay, that's a horrible character. All the characters here, the major characters in here, have histories of their own. They have their own goals, their own motivations. They have their own reasons for doing what they're doing. They're very well fleshed out, and they're not contradictory. You can see their personality leads to their actions. You know how a character will act based on their previously established personalities. So there's a continuity in how they act. And also, it's very easy to sympathize and empathize with these characters because you can see what struggles they have gone through to get to the point where they are. You understand that they have a history that goes, that happened before the events of this story, and that colors their opinions about what's happening now. So yes, characters with fleshed out goals, motivations, personalities, and that they have their own reasons for doing what they're doing and not just there to service the plot. But by far, I think the strongest part of this was the world building. Now, world building is kind of the hallmark of the fantasy genre because it almost always, unless it's an urban fantasy, takes place in a world that is unlike our own. So that's what makes it fun. We're in a different world with different rules and different creatures and all kinds of stuff going on, and fleshing that out is, but that's what makes fantasy. And the world building is by far the strongest part of this. Like I said, it's a very creative world. Again, perpetual daylight, flat surface, and also if you fall off the edge of the content, you'll eventually fall and you'll end up back where you started. So interesting world, like an interesting basic setup. Also, a lot of emphasis is placed on the logic of the world. I don't know how else to describe this. I'm a history guy, I'm not a literature guy, but basically, if a magic exists, a type of magic exists, or a type of technology exists, or a natural resource exists, what logical impact would this have on society? Now, most fantasies, mostly due to Tolkien, are in a pseudo-medieval world, and then if you look at the technology or the magic available, you're like, why? Don't tell me tell me that if you had this kind of power, that wouldn't kick off some sort of an industrial revolution. And 1,000 years have passed since the Dark Lord was overthrown. It's like they're still swinging swords at each other. Nobody's using machine guns and have planes and tanks. And it's yeah, something's not right here. But in this novel, the world building has a logic to it. And for example, there's a substance called darkstone. It's a dark stone. It's a black stone that, if it is not directly exposed to light, becomes immobile. It just doesn't move. It just doesn't move. But if it is exposed to light, light repels it and pushes it along. So there are cars. Basically, you take a carriage or something like a carriage. You put dark stone on it, and then you set up a bunch of mirrors and lenses and stuff like that. and the light shines on it, and it gets repelled because that's what it does, and it pushes the rest of the cart along, and basically you just invented the car. Okay, that's a logical, yeah, okay. So basically there are cars in this world. There also are airships that work on basically the same principle. Okay, there's like this piece of technology, or this resource, this dark stone, has a logical impact on the world, and that these lead to repercussions, which lead to other repercussions, which shape society, and society is based around the environment, rather than being like, yeah, we have all this cool stuff and we're still somehow in the 14th century somehow. It really is not like that. It absolutely, there's a logic to all this, which I think it's really awesome, and that, you know, that there's an author out there that actually, you know, takes these things into consideration. Likewise, since this is written by Shad Adversity, swords play a very prominent part, and now I'm going to get into the part where I talk about the shade and the knight. Apparently, if a human spends too much time in darkness, they turn into a shade, which is kind of like a vampire, zombie, sort of like a ravenous being that goes out and starts slaughtering and killing everybody. And there were events that were known as knights, you know, just the knight. And again, in a world of perpetual daylight, a knight is a pretty terrifying thing, especially when everybody turns into, you know, slavering, you know, horrible monsters. Or if you like if you lock somebody in a basement for too long and you don't give them enough sunlight, they turn into one of these shades, and they are a plague on the world. As such, the only way to kill one of these things is to just really just do a tremendous amount of damage to them. But basically, you take a big sword, like a big cutting sword, or I guess you can say a bardiche would work too. Yeah, something like this right here, and you just hack them to pieces, and you just got to really do a tremendous amount of damage to them. And even though they're at the time of the story, in a time of perpetual daylight, these shades do pop up from time to time. There's also other things around, bandits and wild dogs and all kinds of weird things. So basically, even the average person just walking around has a sword on them in order to, you know, to be able to defend themselves and to serve as a part of the common defense should night return again. And because swords are a prominent part in society, there is the logical consequence that there would be a dueling culture. Again, there's a logical progression to this. And these sword fights, or these sword duels, have a specific set of rules and a specific culture around them specifically. For example, like I said, to kill a shade, the only way to really kill a shade is to get something big, heavy, like a long sword or a saber or a cutlass, something like a big chopping heavy sword, and just do like a big cut heavy damage. However, in dueling culture, people oftentimes use rapiers, and these are looked down upon because the whole point of you carrying a sword is to be able to defend yourself against the shade. Rapiers, being thrust-centric, are pretty much useless against shades, but people carry them around anyway because people want to win, which is, if you watched pro sports anytime ever, people will cheat to win, and they'll do dishonorable things, and they're barely tolerated, but, you know, that is something that people would do. Again, logical consequence of things. That's pretty much like the world building in a nutshell here. It's very logical consequences. You know, shade equals swords. Swords equal dueling. Dueling equals people will do what they can to win, despite the fact that like using a rapier, it contradicts the whole point of, you know, fighting the shade, which is the whole point of carrying a sword to begin with. But that is, of course, human nature, which makes sense. And since we're on the topic of swords, might as well go into sword fighting and the sword fights themselves. And I'd have to say they are very, very well done. There's really, I divide them up into two different types. There's the sword fights without power and the sword fights with power, basically with magic. And the sword fights without the magic are basically, these are Hema duels. The sword fights are very short, they are to the point, which is exactly how a real sword fight would last. They wouldn't be these long clashes of steel, you know, parry, dodge, dodge, parry, block, hack, punch, kick, whatever. You know, no, it would be movement, counter movement, maybe a counter to the counter, and that would be it. There would either be a definitive ending, or you'd be back to square one and nothing decisive would have happened. And it's reflected like this. It's just movement, counter movement, done. End of story. The whole thing, if you take it out of text and you were to play it out in your mind, would take maybe 5 to 10 seconds for these, which makes sense. And of course, they're using actual Hema moves, like nobody's spinning or doing backflips or anything like that, or doing crazy things. Like, no, it's the movements make sense. the movements. I'm no HEMA expert. I'm at best an enthusiastic amateur with these sorts of things. But these are, but there seems to be a logic to the attacks that are done and the defenses against them. Like, these things make sense that somebody would act that way in a real life scenario. Now, this does change up a bit when you go into the later book and magical powers become more prominent. However, I have a very low suspension of disbelief on these things. You just need to tell me, like, magic's involved, and I'm like, good, great. Like, how can plate armor be crushed by a sword or, like, cut through by a sword? It's a magic sword. Oh, okay. Like, I don't really question these things. I have no problem with that. Just, you got to tell me these things, and I'm good to go. But the sword fights do become longer and more drawn out as magical powers get involved. But that, again, of course, makes logical sense because of the magical powers involved. That would prolong, and given how they're presented, that would 100% prolong a sword fight. That just, again, logical progression. These things do make sense. And since we're on the topic of magic, I'm not going to get into the entire magic system. I've already wasted more than enough time rambling here. But I'm detecting a very heavily strong influence from Brandon Sanderson with this. And by that I mean that magic is more of a science than magic. Meaning that magic is a natural phenomenon that some people are able to harness. It has very specific effects and does very specific things. It can do X, magic can do X, Y, and Z. It cannot do A, B, and C, D, E, or F. It will do X, Y, and Z under X, Y, and Z circumstances. That is all it can do. There are no exceptions to this, and you have to work within these rules. So basically, it's just like another set of physics, another set of laws of physics that a magic user must abide by. And I happen to like that. Now, some people do like the mystery of magic, like where it's not as well defined and magic just sort of works. I like both of them personally, but yes, magic is more of a science in this case, meaning that it's a natural phenomenon that can be very specifically categorized and utilized in very specific ways. And I happen to like that, and again, it is also very consistent throughout the entire book. So when it is stated that magic can do X, it only does X. So very consistent with that. So again, there are authors out there and there are books out there where the magic system gets written, just gets thrown to the wind as soon as it becomes inconvenient for the plot. And this is not the case here. It is very well done that way. Okay, now I have been praising it, and overall the book, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I said I was going to be brutally honest, and there were a couple of things that I do have minor issues with. These are minor issues. They did not break my enjoyment at all. They're just some things that I did notice, and I would just, I'm being honest here. The first one is the exposition of things. Specifically, there are times when it seems a little bit on the info dump sort of side of things. Now, I understand in a fantasy novel, especially in a fantasy novel, some things you just have to explain. The best way to convey information is, of course, show, don't tell, and also through dialogue. Basically, characters conversing amongst themselves, and then we, the audience, understand how the world works and world building that way. However, dialogue can be somewhat difficult, and sometimes you just need to just straight out tell the audience, okay, this is how it works. I understand that, and but whenever they would say something that would be unusual, like the shape and size of the continent, or the perpetual daylight, or a piece of technology, there would be just right there an explanation of what happened. And it never, again, wasn't a problem. It never broke my immersion into the novel at all. But it did seem somewhat info dumpy at times. I'm pretty sure info dumpy is not an actual word, but I'm going with it. It was never a major issue. It didn't break my immersion at all. But it does seem at times like, okay, this just like seems sort of, I guess you can say out of place. Because like, narrative, information. Narrative, information. And it just seemed like, not tacked on, but like it just sort of there. Another issue that I had was, it's not really an issue, just more of a curiosity on my part, and that is about the Shade. Due to the nature of the plot, the Shade play a more or less a secondary role in the novel. You don't really learn all that much about them, and I was very curious because they're talked about, they're spoken about all the time, and the terror of night and how horrible these Shade are. But we don't really see that much. They do pop up from time to time, but you don't see them all that often. And I'm really curious as to how they actually work. Like, how does someone become a Shade? I know they, how that they get put in darkness, but how long do they have to stay in darkness for? Or, it's shown in there that there are different types of Shade, and they have like a collective hive mind, maybe. Like, it's hinted that there's a hive mind there, or some sort of consciousness there. Like, how does that happen? How do the Shade work? And that there are like different like leaders, like there's like a caste system implied within this. And that wasn't really explored, and I was kind of hoping for a little bit more explanation on that, just because that sort of thing does interest me. Again, but at the same time, though, I have to admit that adding it in would kind of detract from the overall story, because the story didn't really follow the Shade all that much. But just to have them talked about so much, I would have... I basically, it piqued my curiosity, and it didn't quite fill my, curiosity for this sort of thing. That being said, though, if there are sequels to this, I think that, they will be explored more. It's set up, like, it's basically setting up, like, there's something about these guys, and more information is out there for it. It just, I would have liked to have seen that. But then again, if there are sequels, which I think there will be, I think it'll be explored there. So make of that whatever you will. And since we're on the topic, might as well talk about the ending as well. And the ending was very well done. Again, you can see the build up towards that ending. And the way it was set up for a sequel, potential sequels, or possibly, I think, a serial format. Basically, what I mean by that is, instead of having, a direct sequel, like where, the events of the next book pick up right where we left off, it could be like the, separate adventures in the same world, same characters, but going off on different adventures each time. Kind of like Bond movies. Like each movie is, yes, you have the same characters. You have M, you have Bond, obviously, Q and Moneypenny and all them, and they're going off on this adventure now. Okay, now they're going off on this adventure dealing with this situation. Now they're going off on this adventure, and it's pretty much set up that same way. It's not really a single narrative like, say for example, A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not like where if you just somehow stop, like say right in the middle of Dance with Dragons, you're going to be ending up with a completely incomplete story. Hint, hint, wink, wink, George. You might want to, get moving on that one. Not bitter or anything. So yeah, I just think that, so it is a self-contained novel, and I think it sets up perfectly for more self-contained novels within the same world. You can have callbacks to the first novel, or to previous novels, but again, giving you an opportunity to explore this wider world. So I did happen to like that. That's a format that I think would serve this pretty well. I think that's pretty much what's going to get set up anyway, but I don't read mine. And two other very minor quibbles. What about dragons? Seriously, I mean, you talk about drakes, but you didn't see them. Drakes never showed up. And I don't see any dragons, because a drake is not a dragon. I'm one of those pedantic people. Yes, there is a difference between a drake, a dragon, and a wyvern. And I do notice these things. Sorry, I'm like that. And the other issue is that all of the units and distances in there were done in metric. And I live in Freedom Land. I don't use no kami units. So I had to do math in my head, which I find to be somewhat disappointing. So yeah, gonna have to take some points off for that. But all jokes aside, and a few minor quibbles aside, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I loved every minute of it, and I cannot wait for any potential sequels that may come out from this. And yeah, Shad, congratulations. You wrote a fantastic novel, and I highly recommend it to anybody who would want to purchase it. It is well worth your time, well worth your money. I'm a cheap bastard, so if I say something's worth your money, you know it is absolutely worth it. And I'm not just saying that because of my, my fondness for Shadiversity, or my fandom here. But yeah, I absolutely truly mean it. I do not lie about things like this. I would not lead you guys astray. Everything here, again, was my opinion, but I mean it 100% honesty. Yeah, absolutely. Loved it. So I look forward to future sequels and prequels, and, well, prequels might be a little bit difficult, because prequels are always kind of bad. Always. I can't remember any good prequel. But whatever, like, I really am looking forward to exploring this world further, and possibly, I don't know if Shad's up to it, doing books in another world altogether, like a completely original story. And my cat is clawing at the door right now because he's just doing that. Any case, yeah, so congratulations. Pick up his book. You can get it on Amazon. Shadow of the Conqueror, Chronicles of Everfall by Shad and Brooks. Highly recommended. I don't give grades because I don't give grades. It's a complex personal opinion, and having and just putting like a number or a letter to it just doesn't make sense to me. But yes, absolutely recommend it. Thumbs up. Great, awesome stuff. And look forward to more in the future. So, in any case, please hit the like and subscribe button, wherever the subscribe button is. I don't even know. My battery's dying too. More videos coming out from me whenever I get around to it. And have a good day. Or don't have a good day. You're adults. Have any kind of day you want. See you later.